Stocks had a solid move higher today after 6 days of selling off. We've got economic data at the end of this week, might send the stock market right back down. So what's a stock to buy? I've spent the weekend looking through and asking the question, which are the best stocks to buy? And one of the ones might be a little bit of a surprise, is something that I talked about last week that I'm gearing up to buy more and more. That is, of all things, bonds. ETFs on bonds. The reason why? Federal Reserve is likely to raise the interest rates slightly more, probably a quarter, maybe a half point more. Keep interest rates slightly higher for slightly longer. But then they're going to be lowering interest rates. And as interest rates move lower, price moves higher. So it's time to get ready. This is stocks to buy. Let's jump in. I'll show you the charts I'm looking at. As value investors, if you are looking for stocks to buy, here's a look at the stock market, the broader stock market. And to be quite honest with you, there isn't much left in the tank. The economy itself is running at a pretty high cadence. And because of that, inflation's running a little bit hot. The Federal Reserve thought that they could get to a soft landing. Most of us are sitting around saying we probably have no landing, not even a flyby. I've been saying this for months now. And what I do is I normally front run a lot of the things, a lot of the economic data is coming through. We'll catch a quick pop in the market. I usually trade options, stock options, and then I get out. The reason why? The stock market is getting it wrong. And I don't want to be in long term because you can lose your profits really fast. So using stock options, I'm looking for stocks to buy that I can get in, get an economic data point moving the market, and then taking those profits and getting out really fast. But what about, say, a value investor who's looking for stocks to buy for the long term? And I talked about this last week. Looking at the stock market at where we are now, we may have peaked. The stock market might just ignore all of this and just keep on going. But there isn't a whole lot left in the tank given where we are. And with inflation the way it is, the Federal Reserve is probably going to put a cap on where stocks are. So what I look at is, this is TLT stock, one of my favorites to trade. This is an ETF on the 20 plus, so 20 and 30 year treasury bonds. There's an inverse relationship to price and yield for those of you who don't quite understand that. If yield goes up, price goes down. The Federal Reserve is more than likely going to push yields slightly higher. You can see there was a pretty decent bounce from the very bottom in October. We may challenge those levels again for TLT stock. And at that point, TLT stock becomes a stock to buy. The reason is simple. How much more does the Federal Reserve have to push interest rates? And even if you don't catch the absolute bottom, which when you look backwards all the way back to, on this chart, 2007, I have another chart in this, goes all the way back, I think, to 2002 when TLT stock first showed up. We're basically at the very, very bottom. That doesn't mean that the Federal Reserve can't push interest rates even further, but they've already done a great deal of work and there's not much left for them to do. They just have to fine tune to get inflation to a little bit closer to their 2% target rate. In order to do that, raise interest rates slightly, maybe a quarter, maybe a half, maybe. Beyond that, what happens next is simply the Federal Reserve would then move from a restrictive stance to at very least a neutral stance, then to an accommodative if they need to. I look at this economy and I say it's running hot. There's not much left in the tank. So yeah, they would shift to neutral, then they would shift to accommodative as the economy sort of peters out with its growth rate. Given that, TLT stock to buy. The reason is simple, that the Federal Reserve won't be raising interest rates too much further. Therefore, TLT stock would move back upward. I'm looking at TLT stock and thinking we'll easily clear, say, 110 to 120 over the course of 6 to 9 to 12 months. You hit 120 from down where we are, about 88.5. You're looking at a 36% return, and that could easily happen within, say, 9 months. TLT stock, definitely stock to buy. Let's break down a couple other things I want to look at. Personal incomes and personal expenditures, the top chart, one of the very important things that I look at, we get this indicator on Friday. Personal expenditures versus PCE deflator. The PCE, personal consumption expenditures price index deflator, PCE for short. Incomes versus expenditures, you can see the correlation there. As consumers get more and more money, whether that be from individuals entering the payrolls, moving from unemployment to employment, or vice versa, the rate of growth of incomes in the country either expands or contracts. Expenditures follow suit. Given that, man, this economy, we're running about as hot as we can. We're at all-time highs with total number of individuals employed with an unemployment rate of 3.7%. How much more growth could there be? That might actually be the saving grace for the Federal Reserve and give us the opportunity for stocks to buy, to jump in on equities once they dip. Down below, PCE versus the PCE deflator versus personal expenditures. The correlation is there. It's just not nearly as strong as expenditures versus income. Nonetheless, everything is pointing upward. PCE price index coming in on Friday, very likely to show us prices are a little hotter than everybody wants them to be. Of course, the stock market had been pricing in 3 cuts. Now everybody's saying, kind of looking at it and saying, no cuts. Now, this is a slightly confusing chart to look at. This is the U.S. 10-year Treasury price, not yield, versus TLT stock. Now, TLT trades off the 20 and 30. Very routinely, I defer to the 10-year because it's a good gap in between the 2 and the 20. The 2 is very sensitive to what the Federal Reserve would do. The 20, not so much. You get right in the middle there, that 10-year, and it's the benchmark investment rate. Looking here, what we see is the price on Treasury, the 10-year Treasury, and we're pushing close towards the bottom. Might be able to cherry pick and get a price just below, but for me, TLT stock is probably the easier way to do this and a lot more upside potential when you look at it from that angle. But nonetheless, the median here is about 120 on, or actually 100 on the bond. Most investors don't have access to commodities. TLT stock, being an ETF, is a far easier mechanism to buy. Here's another look at the 10-year, the actual price. Again, we're pretty close to about bottom. This goes all the way back to about 2003. For me, we're about as low as we're probably going to get, but the Federal Reserve might still have to push a little further and then keep rates there a little longer. Regardless, the end result is the same. They're going to contract the economy enough that inflation gets to the 2% target rate. From there, they would move to at least a neutral stance or an accommodative stance. Then TLT stock starts to move much higher. Here, I'm looking at TLT stock, one of the stocks to buy, because as the Federal Reserve does push interest rates higher, if you are looking for stocks to buy, this one outpaces everything else simply because the stock market itself is broadly going to sell off. It's already near record highs, even though it's pulled off the very top. This might be the very top that we see for a period of time. TLT stock, despite the fact that the Federal Reserve might move back to a neutral stance or accommodative, what happens next is simple. The stock market would probably sell off like it did in October. Then we could go sideways for some time, making TLT stock the stock to buy versus stocks in the stock market. It would take a while for the economy to kind of pick back up after the Federal Reserve moved to an accommodative stance, getting the economy moving forward at a pace that equities would then start to pick back up again. This is why TLT stock itself becomes the stock to buy. This is what you really want to kind of look for. It's this shift in where we are with the economy. I always look at the economy first. Then I ask, which are the stocks to buy given the economy that we have? Stocks themselves, They're all the way up at the top versus some of the yields that you're getting out of some of these stocks the next 4 quarters. The downside risk to owning bonds themselves is very limited versus stocks. That's why I'm liking TLT stock. I'm going into Friday's number. Actually, we have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesday, we have durable goods. Thursday, first look Q1 GDP. Friday, of course, personal incomes, personal expenditures, and there's a couple other things that are in there that could knock the stock market downward. But the Q1 GDP could really be something where if we see solid economic growth within the economy, the stock market would sell off. TLT stock, of course, would move lower because yields would spike. Then TLT stock becomes the stocks to buy. What I'm doing, how I'm doing this, is I'm going in front of this number and I'm actually buying some TLT stock. And then if it goes lower, I'm going to continue to pick up TLT stock along the way. The eventuality is the Federal Reserve will shift its policy stance. Inflation is higher than they want, but it's not too high. We're not sitting at 9% anymore. The eventuality is the Federal Reserve shifts, and because of that, TLT stock moves back upward, looking at anywhere from, say, 20 to 30% return, hopefully within 1 year's time. If I've written on my Substack, I've written an entire piece on this. Make sure to click the link down below to my Substack link. This is my economic posts that I put up there are always free. Make sure to hit the follow button there and pick up that free email newsletter there. If you're just finding my channel for the very first time, make sure to hit the like and follow button. We'll see you in the next video.